Hi everyone. Happy New Year. I wanted to do a video today on feedback in writing, and I hope this will be helpful to people who are already writers, people who are thinking about writing, and maybe if you have some kind of a New Year's goal or resolution around writing, perhaps this will be helpful. So one of the things that I became interested in this idea and concept of feedback over the last few years, where I really did a deep dive into trying to understand the science and research and the literature on how people become very good at a certain field or domain. And one of the things that I found, which was especially in the literature on deliberate practice, which you might have seen or encountered if you read Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers or looked at the work of Anders Ericsson or others, is that one of the consistent things they found when you look at people who really become good at something, especially if they do so quickly, is that they constantly get feedback. And so this is why I think a lot of people, when they have a lot of coaches and they really get coaching over many years to get feedback on precise whatever they're doing, whether it's the violin or writing or whatever else. Now, so I thought a lot about this in the context of writing and in terms of how to get feedback on writing, how to make an impact, and then how to leverage the feedback you're getting to produce things that are ultimately high quality. So I think there are basically 6 parts of the writing process where you can get good feedback and incorporate it and ultimately wind up with better writing. So number 1 is in the writing and editing phase. And here, this might be where you're thinking about what you want to write about, and you talk to different people, you brainstorm ideas. And it's really important I found that when you discuss an idea with someone, like, look at their body language. Are they making polite conversation, or are they really interested in the idea? And are they asking you questions? And are they reacting in a certain way? If you really take note of all of this and then incorporate it in the writing process, that can be very helpful. Now, one of the things that I found when I was churning out a lot of content is that I found that if you have a draft of an article and you want to get feedback, it's kind of burdensome or onerous just to go to people and say, oh, would you mind reading my article? You're just asking too much. And then also the other issue with it is, especially where we live in a polite society where people kind of just don't want to be mean, it's hard to get very sort of good feedback. So one of the things that I did was I tried to create mechanisms and systems where I knew that I could get the very harsh, tough feedback that I needed, and also do it in a way where it was a win-win for everyone. So I did this in 2 ways. The first was that I actually just went on Upwork and I posted an ad and I said, look, I'm writing an article, and I wrote the subject of the article so that I would draw people who were actually interested in reading about it. And what I would say is, look, I don't need line editing, but what I do need is a very tough, harsh feedback that's going to make the piece better. And then what I actually did was I created I looked at the backgrounds of the people who were applying, and I gave them a checklist of all the questions that I want answered, so that they would know what to look for. And I'll read off some of these questions that I send. So, is the title interesting and provocative enough to get you to click it and read it? Is the piece readable? Does the author have a distinct voice? Is there a clear thesis? Is the piece well organized? Are the transitions smooth? Are any parts of it unclear or boring? Should it be shortened or expanded anywhere? Is the tone appropriate? What would you criticize about the piece? Are the quotes used appropriately, or are they hard to read? What are the strongest and the weakest arguments in the piece? And then finally, and this is actually I found to be the most important question, which is, number 1, would you read or share this piece if you came across it online? Why or why not? And then, would you want to read more work by this author? And and it's pretty remarkable when you go through that process, because when you actually pay someone to do this kind of feedback, they know that they know that they're not going to, especially if you set the right tone, they know that you're not going to come back to them just for sucking up to you. But they're also, if they're just a total jerk and not offering anything constructive, that's also not going to work. So I found that that's very helpful. The other thing that I did was I formed mastermind groups of other people who are also writers. And I think just any writer, anyone who's producing content on a regular basis will tell you that they have a hard time with getting people to read and comment. But I found that if you get a core group of people who are like similar enough that they have things in common, but also they come across, if they're doing writing from different perspectives and whatever, they can also offer feedback. And then I found there are different ways to organize it, but basically you share everyone's draft by a certain point, then you get on a call and you talk about it. And that way everyone's putting in a little bit, but they're also getting something out of it. So that's number one. Number two is using the submission process to get feedback. And I think there's obviously some kind of writing where it doesn't make sense to submit it in a journal or a magazine. So you'll see, like on my Facebook page, for example, there's a lot of random blog posts or whatever. They're not very well organized, and if I really put in the time, I could turn it into something publishable. Sometimes you just want to get it out there, put it on your own blog or whatever. But if you do make a decision that you want to get your work published, then I think this whole submission process can be a very interesting, informative way of getting feedback. Because the reality is that when you're trying to get someone to publish your work, what you're trying to get them to do is basically to open their platform to you, open their brand to you, and and they've now obviously built trust with their readers and their audience. And the question is, can you go to that editor, can you go to that publication and persuade them that your idea or your writing is good enough that it should be published there? And I'm not saying this because I think that opinion editors or editors at publications are some great arbiter of good writing. I actually think the submissions processes at most publications are dysfunctional. But the point is that it is a barometer. It is a way to test the strength and skill of your writing and your ability to promote. So I would say that when you pitch an article to an editor and you get ignored, or they say no to you, it's very easy to say, well, that opinion editor is a jerk, he doesn't get it, he's lazy, whatever. But if you take a more constructive approach and you say, maybe there is something in my pitch, maybe something in my idea that needs work, over time you're going to get more and more success. One of the other points I should make here too is, if you notice and you look up my own writing, with the notable exceptions of when I was actually on the staff of certain magazines, I publish in a very wide array of publications. And the reason I do that is because one of the things you find is when you establish a relationship with an editor, a certain amount of laziness or complacency can set in, where like you send in a draft and then they publish it, and that can be very good, obviously, to have that kind of relationship and pipeline. But when I write something new, the first thing I do is think about who are the publications or whatever who actually have an audience that I want to target. And when you really like dig down, and what you usually find is that you may not actually want to go to top flight publications. You'd much rather go to that smaller blog that has like the 50 to 150 people who really care about what you're writing about, and that's going to get you more of the kind of feedback that you want. And then I also enjoy the challenge of like getting to know people cold, building new relationships, and really using that as a barometer or a test of my writing. Okay, number three is how much attention is your writing getting? Now, by attention, what I mean here is like when you actually get your writing out there, what kind of response are you getting? And I find that there are usually a couple different things that happen. When you think about attention, there's often people think, well, the measure of how good your writing is how many likes you get on Twitter or whatever. And I do think that's actually important. But the way I think about it is, even before I write the piece, I usually think about, what kind of attention do I want it to get? And sometimes I'll write an article where literally the target audience is one person. So that might be, for example, like if I'm applying for a job or I'm trying to use writing to close a certain deal or get a client. And there, what I basically do, I write the article for one person, and the metric, the attention metric for success that I'm looking at is, can I get that one person to like find the article and engage it and share it. And then, whoever else benefits from it, that I consider that a bonus. But other times, there is value in writing for mass appeal. And here you do want to be tracking the likes and shares and comments and so forth that you're getting. One of the things I did at the when I was at the American Conservative, and I'm sure this drove the staff absolutely nuts, is I organized basically a morning and an afternoon staff meeting. And one of the things we would do is we would look in very great detail at every single article that we published. And we would do a deep dive and see how many views were there, how many shares were there, like what kind of traffic or attention was it getting on social media. And the point that I made was that, look, we're not in the clickbait business, but the point is that, if you're writing an article and not too many people are reading it, but one of the readers are the president or the secretary of defense or like the small community of people who really can benefit from it, great, I consider that a success. Or if you're writing an article and you just get like a boatload of attention and people are booking you to do interviews and they invite you on their TV show or whatever, that's also a barometer of success. But the point is that if you're not getting either, you're just writing an article and the experts aren't engaging it, powerful people aren't engaging it, and it's also not getting mass attention, I think you have to like confront the reality that maybe your writing just sucked. Like maybe it just wasn't that good. And I mean, believe me, when you say this to people who are writers, this can really challenge their egos. But what I found is that, the people who ultimately develop as writers and improve and get better are the people who can who can, rather than blaming the market, they can look at the market and accept that, there's value here in the feedback, and that if your writing isn't getting the kind of traction that you want it to, odds are there probably, there's probably something going on. Now, often what's going on is simply that people are just not marketing their writing enough. And so like when I would write an article, I mean, I would say that I often spend just as much time actually promoting the thing as writing it. And so that would mean like, just like, obviously getting it out on social media, but also even just like making a very detailed list of all the people who might be interested, or emailing it to them privately, or like direct messaging them on some social media platform. One of the things that I've done is when I write an article, I look up all the different podcasts and radio hosts who might be interested in that subject, and I just like directly email them or their producers. And then most of them will ignore it, but often they don't, and all you need is one or two of them to go to bat for it, and that can generate a great deal of attention. Okay, number 4 is response, and I think response is different from attention. So attention is just whether or not people actually read it and do something with it. But I think response is a little bit different here, where you're now thinking about what are people actually saying about the substance of your article, I find here that there are different kinds of responses, at least that I've gotten. Often people will read it and like they won't get it, or they'll say like, oh, it's a dumb article or whatever, or sometimes people will say, I love this article, I totally agree with it. Or sometimes people will really engage in it and offer different kinds of criticisms or commentary, or they'll say like, I agree with that part, but not that part, or I liked that part, but that's a totally ridiculous comment, and that kind of feedback can be very helpful. And one of the things that I did when I was at the American Conservative, and I've also just been doing it for my own things, like I would actually create an impact analysis where I would literally like create a memo of all the feedback that I got, all the comments, and just write it down. And then one of the things that you find is that you usually end up getting different forms of consistent patterns in terms of how people are reacting to it. And one of the things that is very interesting is that, I my view at least is that a sign of a good response, one can debate this, but I think a sign of a good response is your article polarizing? So I can give you an example. Like one of the articles that I wrote was on looking at this epidemic of male infertility. And I gave it like a clickbait article. It was something like silent sperm killers or something like that. And I found I got very polarizing feedback from it. Like I remember one of my colleagues from the Pentagon, he's now actually a senior Defense Department analyst, and he didn't say this to me directly, but he told a friend of mine, he's like, what the hell is Pratik writing about? This seems like a desperate attempt to get attention. I mean, I'm sort of at the point where I don't really care that much, but it does like kind of hurt. But then like I also met a friend of mine. I didn't even ask him about it. He brought up that article, and he said, that was a really informative article, and I actually clicked through all the different sources and footnotes. And by the end of it, I was so like concerned about it, I actually went and I got my lab work done. And he now actually has a child on the way. And so, then you can, when you get that kind of polarizing feedback, like very positive and very negative, you can then make a decision, like, how much do you care and whatever. My own view is that you're generally better off ignoring the people who don't get it, as long as you have a core community of people who really buy into your work and get it. Now, I guess related to response is the sources in your article. So one of the things that I try to do is I spend a lot of time researching the article and then actually like including a lot of hyperlinks and footnotes and citations. And I found that this is a very helpful way of getting feedback, because what ends up happening is, first of all, the more links and citations and the more just well-researched your article is, the more organic traffic it'll get. But the other thing that happens is that the more so two things happen. One is that, when you actually link to other people's work and you have sources, you now create an invitation to engage them. And so rather than like writing an article and then emailing some expert in your field and saying, I wrote this article, you might be interested, you might get a reaction. But if you say instead, I wrote this article, and by the way, I cited that article you wrote in the Journal of American History or whatever, odds are that guy probably spent a lot of time and energy writing that article. He probably didn't get as much comment and feedback as he wanted to. And then when you show them that you really have taken their work seriously and you engage, even if you're like totally criticizing it, you can usually develop and form a relationship, and it's usually much easier for them to. They have more of an incentive to promote your work, if only because it's for themselves. The other thing that happens, I found too, is when you write an article that really is well researched and there's a lot of citations and whatever, there's always like at least one or two people out there who know more about the subject than you are and have already like kind of done the literature review. Maybe it's an academic or a PhD student or whatever, and then they'll come back to you, or they'll publicly like criticize a certain source you used or how you quoted it or how you used it, or they'll just say like, oh, that academic's not relevant. So like, for example, one of the things when I wrote an article on vaccines, I was looking into like very kind of obscure academic writing and science that I could understand, but obviously not as well as a biologist or whatever. And then I just got a flood of commentary, and some of it was obviously people agreed, some who disagreed, but when they would like attack different sources or criticize the methodology of a certain study, that I found that to be very educating, and it helped me understand my own argument a little bit better. And then the final form of feedback is, can you make money off the article? Can you monetize it? And I found that this is like a really big topic, and one that can sort of provoke all kinds of emotions in people who tend to be writers, especially like political writers and commentary writers, as opposed to copywriters. But the question is, like, when you write an article, can you make money off of it? And the way that I think about this is that, markets aren't by any means perfect arbiters of value, but they're probably like the best form of arbiter that we have. And when you really think about whether or not something has value, I would argue that a very important question is, are people actually willing to pull out their credit card and pay for it? Now, when I say, can you monetize the article, I'm not saying that, can you write an article and get someone to pay you a lot of money for it? But what I mean is, like, can you take that article and turn it into something that makes money? That could be your personal brand. That could be a product that you're selling. Maybe one of the things I've done is, can you take that article and then take it to a CEO or a potential client or whatever, and can you like show them that work and get them to hire you for something or pay you for something? Can you make money off of affiliate links, if that's how you want to do it? There are all kinds of ways, but I think that if you really look at, like, is your article actually making money? Are people actually, as a result of reading this article, pulling out their credit card and buying something or spending money in a way that benefits you, whether or not you care about the money or not? I think that accepting that markets and the way markets respond to your work is an indication of the value is, I think, an enormous mindset shift that can really sort of make you think critically about what you're writing, how you're writing it, and thinking about the value of it. So that's all that I have on the subject. I'd be very interested if, especially from people who are writing regularly, if you have other forms of feedback or other ways of getting feedback, or how you've generally managed this your writing and incorporated a response, and how you've thought about this. The other thing too that I guess I should mention, I've kicked around the idea for a long time of maybe putting together some kind of a guide or an ebook or something for aspiring writers, maybe like political writers or people who write op-eds or whatever. I mean, I've been basically publishing since high school, and I found that I've had to learn it on my own. I haven't really found a good guide or resource, particularly for political writers. But I don't actually know if there's a market out there for it, or what would be interesting. So if you think you could benefit from something like that, or something you would want to collaborate on, or something, let me know, and maybe we can put together some kind of a resource that would be helpful. But anyway, I hope this helps. I'll be interested to hear what you think, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.